absolute, undiluted hell. The past few hours for David Jenkins had been nothing but pain and disbelief. An anonymous email claimed that his beloved wife of 6 years, Lauren, was seen entering a room at a cheap motel last Wednesday afternoon, and that she was now having lunch again with the same man. To say that David was shocked would be a gross understatement. He and Lauren were deeply in love, having sex 3 to 5 times a week, and their lovemaking sessions were usually intense and sincere. Not yet 30, he thought their lovemaking was energetic and pleasurable for both of them. Nevertheless, he couldn't ignore the email or its consequences. So, feeling more tense and agitated than he had ever been in his life, he went home that day a changed man. Arriving home around 6 p.m. as usual, he saw Lauren's car already in the driveway. Still in her work clothes, she stood at the sink rinsing vegetables as he entered the kitchen, awkwardly greeted her, and set down his briefcase. "Hi, honey, how was your day?" Lauren dried her hands with a towel before turning to kiss him. David was struck by how carefree Lauren seemed after spending the day with another man. "Great, but today we had some bad news related to the project we're working on, and it looks like I'll have to go to Greensboro on Friday, so I won't be home until at least 8 in the evening, depending on how the meetings go, and then I'll head straight home." David knew Lauren's work schedule fairly well, especially that it was most flexible on Wednesdays and Fridays in the latter part of the day. His first thought on how to verify the accusations in the email was to make it easier for Lauren this coming Friday. The project crisis, meetings, and business trip all were lies, and instead, he arranged to take Friday off, do some preliminary work, and keep an eye on the motel for Lauren and her lover. "Well, at least you don't have to stay overnight, and we'll still have the whole weekend together," Lauren suggested. "Since you can't really predict when you'll be home, could you give me a call when you leave Greensboro? I'll try to prepare dinner as best as I can." David pondered for a moment. Yesterday, he wouldn't have noticed or even thought about how attentive Lauren was, trying to arrange a joint dinner despite his unplanned business trip. Now, he wondered if she had asked him for a 2-hour window to close her legs and erase any traces of her lover. "Of course, I'll call you when I have a better idea of when I can leave Greensboro, and I'll also call from the road when I know when I'll be home. Sound good?" Since the purpose of Friday now seemed to be to facilitate Lauren's ability to deceive again, if it really was her in the motel, and if the email was accurate, David wanted Lauren to feel comfortable knowing he wouldn't have the opportunity to catch her. "David, I'm going to prepare dinner and then quickly take a shower. Could you watch this skillet for me while I'm gone?" "Make sure the vegetables don't burn," Lauren asked, taking her purse and carrying it upstairs. "Of course, dear. Don't worry," David replied, meanwhile thinking to himself, "Strange, I thought she usually left her purse downstairs." The shower itself made him think. Although not unheard of, she usually didn't shower immediately upon returning home. So, while checking his emails and stirring the vegetables nervously, he pondered whether the impromptu shower was related to the news in the email he had received earlier. "Damn my life," David thought. "One anonymous email and I'm questioning everything in my marriage, which until today I considered absolutely wonderful." During dinner, David was clearly lost in thought. "Is something else wrong, honey? Besides the project you mentioned? You seem awfully quiet, almost like you're on another planet," Lauren finally asked, receiving a brief response to a couple of questions she posed. "No, sorry. I guess I'm just tired, and also thinking about what I need to do tomorrow to be ready to head to Greensboro on Friday," David replied. David understood he needed to act normal to avoid making Lauren think something was amiss. David found it almost amusing. What now could be considered normal? Could my wife be cheating on me? Or could someone with a shitty sense of humor be pulling a prank? Or could I be the unintended victim of a wrong email address? What if it was a completely different woman, and the sender mistook her for my wife? Damn this life. Yesterday, I was sure of my happiness, and today I'm a damn wreck of doubts. Dinner was cleared away, and after watching TV for a while, David and Lauren discussed their plans for the weekend and eventually began preparing for bed. David had already mentioned he would go to bed early because he needed to get up early for work to prepare for the trip. David's stomach tied in knots at the thought of what he would do if Lauren made any moves towards sex tonight. He thought about their Wednesday evenings and whether there had been any pattern in their sex life lately, and with horror realized that, according to his memories, it was about 50:50. Connecting this with her shower after work, he felt like a fool trying to pin the tail on a two-faced donkey. Lauren got into bed first, and when David joined her, she quickly snuggled up to him from behind, hugged him tightly, and reached out to scratch his chest with her nails. "Can I distract you from work for 30 minutes, darling?" playfully suggested Lauren. "Shit," thought David. "How much more can I take before I lose my composure?" He patiently stuck to plan A and replied, "As much as I'd love to, dear, neither today nor tomorrow will I be much use to you. I'm just too absorbed in this project hanging over me." Saying this, he again couldn't believe how much his life had changed in the 60 seconds it took to read and understand that simple email he received just 10 hours ago. "It's okay, honey, I understand. I just thought if you were up for it, I'd offer you a little well-deserved stress relief." Lauren hugged David tightly and kissed the back of his head before wishing him a good night and rolling over to the other side. David felt relieved, yet at the same time, what did she mean by, "if you were up for it"? Damn my life. David got up and left for work before Lauren woke up, so he avoided further questions or probing looks. He realized how poorly he was handling the problem, real or imagined. The previous night reminded him of Poe's The Telltale Heart, and realizing this, he knew he had to avoid another night of close contact with Lauren. "Hi, darling, I'm going to work late tonight, preparing for tomorrow's trip and meetings, so don't worry about dinner for me, and I'll probably see you before bedtime," David left in her voicemail around noon. However, Thursday was spent unprepared for the business meetings. David was a planner and organizer by nature and profession. So although he had no undeniable evidence of her infidelity, he wanted everything organized. He called everyone until he found a lawyer who could meet with him the next day, and searched online for recording devices. Deciding on one he wanted to buy, he searched for local stores with similar devices and found a shop he would visit before heading home. David was competent enough in his actual work that no one questioned what was happening, but his heart and mind were clearly elsewhere. He was a little late coming home from work, then stopped by a surveillance equipment store and bought a simple voice-activated pin that he thought he could hide in Lauren's purse, which she usually had with her in her office and in the car. He also brought work home to pretend he was preparing for the trip the next day until Lauren went to bed. "Hi, honey. I'm so glad you're finally home," said Lauren, approaching the door when David arrived around 9 p.m. "How's the project and trip going?" "I think okay. Since we found out about these new issues, we've allocated more resources to it, so I hope everything will be resolved by Friday, for better or worse." This is playing with fire, David reflected. For better or worse. I wonder if she feels the same right now? To David's relief, Thursday evening was a repeat of the previous night, just with hugs. To her credit, Lauren seemed perfectly composed and, as far as David could tell, treated him as she always had. Figuratively speaking, though, he was such a wreck that Lauren probably had an easy time seeming normal compared to David. On Friday, rising again at dawn, David checked the pin, placed it in Lauren's purse, and left home. He spent some time in a cafe, then headed to his meeting with a lawyer at 10 a.m. David considered this meeting solely for gathering information, but he ended up liking the lawyer a lot. They discussed David's email and his still unconfirmed concerns, as well as today's date with a potential lover that David planned to investigate himself. He acknowledged he had nothing but that cursed email, so going all in on a private detective or thousands of dollars in surveillance equipment didn't make much sense. From the lawyer, David learned about the standard reality of divorce, if it came to that. Without children, a no-fault divorce was relatively straightforward, especially since David and Lauren earned comparable incomes and had similar pension plan balances. The house was mostly in debt, so its liquidation would be more of an emotional shock than a financial strain. However, David left the law firm in complete bewilderment. How could I even sense this nightmare and think everything wouldn't be so bad? We were supposed to be together forever, until death do us part. David spent his lunchtime at a cafe, browsing the internet and continuing to study the procedure of what is called divorce. Websites abound with information on how to detect a cheating spouse, as well as how to avoid detection when cheating, how to hide income, and how to find it. The most enlightening were the sites dedicated to why spouses cheat. None of what David read touched on Lauren's motivations. This fact alone likely caused David deep down to hope that it was all a mistake. Lauren couldn't be cheating on him. They were too close, too deeply in love, too synchronized with each other for it to be true. When he could no longer dwell on the topic of deceit, he gathered his things and left, heading to the motel. Time seemed to drag slowly, or so it felt to David. As he drove to the motel mentioned in that cursed email, he realized that if this whole affair story was indeed true, it was quite possible that Lauren didn't always use the same motel. If that were true, then his entire day could have been in vain, and he still wouldn't know for sure. The pin he placed in her purse might eventually yield some results, but David knew he could no longer bear this uncertainty about the state and future of his marriage. Pulling into the motel parking lot at 1:40 p.m., he circled around until he found a secluded spot with a view of most rooms and the office. Now he just had to wait. There weren't many people coming and going at the motel, so when the man parked his latest model Acura, visited the office, and then entered a ground floor room, he seemed vaguely familiar to David. The name didn't come to mind, but David felt like he had seen this person before. All of David's doubts ceased, along with his hopes, about 5 minutes later when Lauren parked her Honda Accord next to the Acura, grabbed her purse, approached the door of the same room, and knocked briskly. A few seconds later, the man opened the door, and Lauren entered with her usual ease and confidence. For heaven's sake. It's all true, thought David, pounding his fists on the steering wheel. How could Lauren do this to us? And why? There was simply no sense or reason in this. David had never felt so blind in his life. The planner and organizer had just had the rug pulled out from under him. David's thoughts raced left, right, up, and down like a roller coaster, and he suddenly realized that he was now a participant in a crumbling marriage, one in complete and awful crisis. Knowing that today was at least the second instance of Lauren's infidelity, and that she had skipped work to do it, made David feel there was nothing more to gain by hanging around in the motel. He wasn't going to confront them, knocking on the door. It could turn unpleasant, and he needed time and space to calm down and prepare for his next steps. His disbelief up to this point had left him emotionally unprepared for what came next. Then he remembered the pin he had placed in her purse and grimaced bitterly. Real-time audio, he thought with pain. Just great. He had the presence of mind to take several photos of the two cars parked side by side before their love nest and close-ups of the man's car with the license plate, before slowly turning towards the exit and back onto the road. He had no destination in mind, but he aimlessly drove for a while until he nearly ran a red light and was almost hit. This shook him up, so he stopped at a brew pub and had a beer, trying to gather his thoughts. At first, he thought he had just transitioned from idle suspicion to full awareness, but he realized how little he actually knew at this point. And he had no idea who this guy was, how long this had been going on, and, more importantly, why? As far as he knew, for over 7 years, he and Lauren had been exclusive, engaged, and then married. He had enough evidence to confront her, but not enough to know if what Lauren would say was true. As painful as it was to listen to the recording of today's rendezvous, he knew he needed to wait to retrieve the pin from her purse before saying anything to Lauren. He also knew he couldn't be near the loving Lauren if she was in the mood for sex later, after his supposed business trip. This week he had been pushing her away, citing the trip, so his ready-made excuse would disappear, and further refusal of sex with Lauren would likely raise her awareness that something was amiss. So, what to do? I need that pin, then I need to quickly confirm there's something on it, and then I could leave home and stay away for a few days to figure out where I stand in all this shit, David scribbled in his mind. With this general plan in mind, a cunning thought came to David. She thinks I'll arrive later than usual tonight. To shake her and her lover up, I need to call with news that I'm almost home. After finishing his beer and settling the bill, he pulled the car back onto the road and dialed Lauren's mobile number. He left a voicemail. Hey darling, great news. The prep work paid off big time, and everyone did a fantastic job getting everything back on track. So I'm about 30 minutes out of Charlotte, and traffic isn't too bad. I should be home around the usual time. I hope this scares the shit out of her, damn bastard, David muttered to himself aloud. He headed home and, upon arrival, quickly packed a couple of bags and placed them in the trunk of his car. Then he sat down and wrote a note to Lauren. Depending on how the night went, he wanted to have the option to just escape without a big confrontation. He didn't know what was on the recording, so he didn't want a full-scale confrontation yet. Part of his reasoning was also a desire to shock her to the same extent she had shocked him. When David called Lauren, she and her lover Rob were in the throes of their second coupling that day. Today was their last day together, and thanks to David's additional runway, they completed a second lap for the first time. They saw it as a celebration or a victory dance, but now it seemed like a potentially reckless move. Listening to the voicemail message, she muttered, "Shit. I need to move, Rob." That was David, saying he's already heading back and will be home around 6 p.m. as usual. "Well, at least you got the early warning call he promised you," Rob joked in response as Lauren hugged him goodbye and quickly rushed to the bathroom to take a shower. Routine and habits took over. Rob dressed and left the room while Lauren was taking a shower. He headed to the gym for his standard workout after their lovemaking and shower. On the way home, Lauren was more concerned about David's early return home and his cheerful mood about the project turning for the better. "I thought he would come home late and probably burn out from meetings and trips, but he'll likely want to make love tonight after missing most of the week," she thought, turning into their neighborhood. Still a bit nervous, she rounded the corner, approached their home, and saw David's car already parked in the driveway. "Holy shit, he made good time in Friday traffic," she muttered aloud, parking her Accord next to his new Civic. Lauren thought he might want to pounce on her as soon as she walked in, and that more time since her illicit afternoon sex might come in handy. She thought maybe preemptively suggesting a nice celebratory dinner could be a good idea. David was on pins and needles when he heard Lauren's car in the driveway. It would be the first time he would see her since he found out for sure that she was cheating. Bags packed and in the car, note prepared, all he needed was the pin for the note. He sat in the living room, waiting to confront Lauren as soon as she arrived. "Hi, honey," exclaimed Lauren, entering and seeing David rising from his chair. "Looks like everything went well. Why don't we go somewhere to eat and celebrate?" she asked him as they hugged and kissed each other. "That sounds great, especially since I got home early. Why don't you go upstairs and change, and I'll go ahead and make a reservation somewhere?" David suggested. Lauren readily agreed, tossing her work bag and purse on the table, then heading up the stairs to the master bedroom. David waited until he heard the shower start, then approached her purse and retrieved the pin. He pressed rewind, then play, hearing the beginning of the lovers' conversation before quickly turning off the pin. "Well, that settles it. Time to get out of here," David said, taking out his note for Lauren and leaving it on the table next to her bags. Pausing at the door, David looked back at their home, sadly realizing that things between him and her would never be the same again. Lauren hurried into the shower and quickly dressed, coming downstairs with her still damp ponytail. She assumed he might be hungry after the trip and probably wanted to have sex later. Not finding him in the living room, she headed to the kitchen and saw a note lying on the table. Taking it and starting to read, she gasped, "Oh God, no. This can't be. Lauren, I know about your lover and your affair. I couldn't believe it was true, but your daytime rendezvous at the motel dispelled all doubts. You broke my soul, and I am so sad and hurt that I can't be around you right now. I'll be gone for a night or two while I try to gather my thoughts, then I'll call you to arrange a time for our talk. Do not try to contact me or find me. Trust me when I say I should not see you until I'm ready." David left home and drove to the hotel. Settling into his room, he had dinner downstairs, ordered a double scotch on the rocks, and then reluctantly returned to his room to listen to the recording of Lauren's daytime betrayal of their marriage vows. Seating himself in the chair at the writing desk, he turned on the recorder and heard the following sound as soon as Lauren entered the room. "Lauren, hi, Rob. I can't believe we're done already, both in meetings and in time. I didn't think we'd smoothly get through at least 5 meetings, let alone within 30 days. Rob, hi Lauren. Yeah, I thought it would take more time. We spent much more time planning and preparing than executing. I guess that's the result of good planning, right? I suppose so. I must say, I'm glad it's all over. The stress of hiding our affair is getting to me, and I understand why long-term affairs usually end catastrophically. Yeah, it's the same here. I know my wife has no idea, but I can see how this could easily end over time. You said David won't be in town until late evening, right? I thought we could have a drink together today to celebrate our success and finish things off with a bang. Haha, that's quite unconvincing, Rob. I'm kind of up for it, but rules are rules, so we're not doing anything new that wasn't on the list. Lauren and Rob parted, and David heard kisses and tender moans coming from Lauren. That's so nice, Rob. Oh, that feels so good. That's it. Oh, I'm on the cusp of. David heard the bed creak, and then, my turn. All right, give me that. I want everything to be good and hard in the first round. Oh, it's going to be intense. My wife hasn't had sex since the baby was born. Your tongue feels amazing. David listened to the entire 90 minutes of illicit sex between Lauren and Rob. Two things struck him. Firstly, the sex seemed normal, even mundane, and David couldn't understand why Lauren risked her marriage for the same old thing. Rob used condoms during intercourse, and nothing they did was particularly erotic or exotic. Secondly, neither of them humiliated or debased their spouses in any way. David knew the affair was real. They had met 5 times, but he still had no inkling of the why behind it. Friday night was mostly sleepless for both David and Lauren. Eventually, David gave up and realized there was nothing more to glean from the recording. Deciding to take the weekend off and be free from work, he messaged Lauren, "I'll come by your place at 11 a.m. to talk, if that's okay with you." Upon hearing the ping of an incoming message, Lauren grabbed her phone. "Yes. Please come home. I'm so sorry I've caused you pain." David ignored Lauren's response. Arriving shortly before 11 a.m., David dragged himself to the front door and rang the doorbell. Lauren opened the door. "David, you don't need to call in your own house," she said. "I just felt awkward walking in," David replied. "Can we sit at the kitchen table and discuss the next steps?" Lauren was displeased with David's businesslike behavior and how the discussion was unfolding. As they sat facing each other at the table, time momentarily stood still. Then David cleared his throat and asked a question that shook Lauren to her core. "Do you deny in any significant way the facts I've learned about your involvement with Rob?" Lauren teared up, reflecting on David's question and how focused and serious he was. In her opinion, this conversation needed to make David understand that nothing she had done changed her feelings for him, and that her affair with Rob was merely to prove their co-workers wrong. David knew only about the meaningless sex and nothing of the conversations at work that led to Rob and Lauren's plan to prove their friends wrong. "David, before we proceed further, you must first understand that Rob and I did this only to prove that we could have an affair without anyone finding out. Several months ago, many of us at work were discussing affairs and how they almost always get discovered, as well as the tragic upheavals they cause in marriages. The discussion divided into 2 camps. Some thought that any affairs beyond one-night stands would inevitably be exposed. Others believed that keeping something more than a one-night stand secret would require some planning and, of course, a fair amount of deceit, but it could be done. Rob and I fell into the latter camp, and then we discussed what precautions would be necessary. Wait a second, are you saying this was just an experiment or a game? Just to see if you could have an affair that would go unnoticed? Yes, essentially, that's it. It all started as discussions that turned into a game. The hypotheses we outlined over several lunches just took on a life of their own, and eventually, we detailed everything quite extensively, convincing ourselves that we could pull it off. But therein lay the rub. To truly succeed, it meant that not a soul would know or ever find out about what we achieved. In short, we decided to test our plan, fully aware that Rob loved his wife as much as I love you, and that this game, if you will, meant nothing in terms of our relationships. It was just sex, and one of our conditions for the test was that it had to last at least 30 days, and we had to meet at least 5 times. But it was just sex, David. We don't love each other at all. We love our spouses. We deliberately avoided anything sexual that we wouldn't share with our partners, and it never took away from our spouses. What do you mean it didn't take away from mine? I used to have a faithful wife, and now I don't. Yes, I suppose now that you know, that's true. But if you had never found out, you would have believed I was faithful. In my heart, it was meaningless sex. And throughout this whole month, if you wanted sex after Rob and I were together, I never denied you. Great, Lauren. Messy seconds, and no harm done. Now I feel really warm and fuzzy inside. Listen, I know you're hurting, and you must feel awful hearing all this, and I sincerely regret causing you pain. But I hope the details I shared can dispel any doubts about my love for you and erase any thoughts about my feelings for Rob. He's just a colleague with whom I had sex, but that's all it was. Just sex. No love, no feelings. It's only because you know now that it seems awful. Rob and I were very careful, and we were sure we'd never be found out, and we never thought it would harm our marriages. Okay, so this is a long story, essentially admitting that you cheated on me for a month, had sex with a man who isn't your husband about 5 times, and fully intended to keep this affair secret from me, your husband, for the rest of our lives. Returning to my main question, I suppose you don't deny any of the appalling facts I've learned about your activities with Rob? Lauren slumped a bit from the direct reiteration of her justifications. Yes, I suppose the facts are what they are. But the reasons behind them should matter. It was just sex. And it wasn't even sex born out of desire for each other. There was no longing between us. We just needed sex to prove we could keep the affair hidden. Sex was meaningless for both of us. David was torn between the thought that Lauren must have swallowed a bottle of stupid pills last month and the question of whether she always adhered to such absurd beliefs. I really believe this thin piece of shit from you. Doesn't seem like there was much passion between you two. That's exactly it, David. There was no passion. It was just sex. I know you're hurting, but I'm willing to do anything to make amends. Hold on. This is still dog shit. All this justification of it was just sex, nonsense, and you should know that very well. We talked about being faithful when we decided to be exclusive. We discussed it in detail when we talked about marriage. We dated exclusively for almost a year, and we talked about it again before I proposed. We specifically promised each other fidelity during premarital counseling and in our damn wedding vows. I don't recall a single mention of it was just sex escape plan. Lauren saw arguing with their history was pointless. David, you're right. We did indeed discuss fidelity in detail. The point I'm trying to convey is that we're on the same page where it matters, considering our love for each other. I have loved only you for the past 7+ years and never for a moment felt any feelings for Rob. If playing Yahtzee with Rob 5 times a month could have meant something, we would have done it. It was just sex, but sex was necessary to pull off the secret affair. It was more like those stupid pills were to blame for everything, and then David seized on what Lauren had just said. So why didn't you just play Yahtzee? Or should you have just played backgammon? Or just engaged in some other damn thing besides just sex? You clearly said you didn't have to have sex with Rob, and you also said no other soul would ever know about this affair, so you could have done something else in that hotel room, and it would have looked and smelled like an affair. Mission accomplished, right? To prove you could have an affair, you didn't actually need to have sex. You still needed to hide your activities from your spouses, so there was guilt involved regardless. You still left work early, so you still had to hide it, whether with sex or without. Lauren's head tilted sideways as she pondered David's challenge, feeling herself quickly sinking deep. Lauren couldn't come up with any other excuses to overcome his assumption. Since no one would ever know, whether Rob and Lauren had sex didn't really matter. To win their little undeclared bet, they just needed to play out the affair with all the necessary secrets and hotel meetings. So why did she actually have sex? I don't know, David. I never thought about that aspect of secrecy. We planned the secret affair to see if we could do it. Then we decided to test our plan. It was just supposed to be that we would go all the way to the end. Lauren, all day today you've been using the word just to minimize what you've done, like saying just a second, or just a little bit, when in reality what you've done is causing serious damage, and that's the worst thing either of us could do to our marriage. The fact that you don't see this yourself may be worse than you having sex with another man 5 times a month. Hell, you almost make it sound like you've only done it 5 times. So it's not a big deal. Well, it's very important to me. And right now we haven't gotten anywhere, so I'm leaving for now. David left, returning to the hotel. On Monday, he skipped work and began to ponder Lauren's arguments. He couldn't believe she had thought so little about her faithfulness, tossing it aside to win a phantom bet against her co-workers who knew nothing. To her, it was all a game. Enough for me, David thought to himself. I could sit here, torment myself, and try to find some explanation for her actions, but there isn't one. It wasn't just sex. It was a betrayal of her commitments to him, her precious vows to keep those commitments to him forever, until death do us part. What struck David most of all, ultimately, was how surprisingly at ease he felt with his final decision. He felt better than he had since receiving that damn email. Not losing hope, Lauren readily agreed to another meeting the next day. "What's this?" asked Lauren, quickly scanning a stack of papers. "It's just divorce," David replied.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments.